everyone, and welcome to Luke Shalan's Artist in Resident Talk. I'm Nathan Stanfield. I'm the studio manager at the American Museum of Ceramic Art in Southern California. AMOCA champions the art, history, and creation and technology of ceramics through exhibitions, collections, outreach, and studio programming. Today's Artist Talk focuses on the work of Luke Shalan, who arrived in March for a 6-month residency here at the AMOCA Ceramic Studio. AMOCA's Artist in Resident program, established in 2012, is one of the few long-term fellowship opportunities for ceramic artists on the West Coast. Our residency program, which provides artists an opportunity to produce or develop a new body of work, is funded through the generous support from Julianne and David Armstrong, Laguna Clay and Glaze Company, and the Wingate Foundation. The next call for residency applications will be in early January of 2025. Today, Luke will be sharing some of the work he's completed recently and talk about his time as an artist in resident at AMOCA. So before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about Luke. So Luke Shalan received his BFA with a focus in ceramics from the California College of Arts in Oakland, California. In addition, he studied at the Australian National University School of Art in Canberra and attended Penland School of Craft in Penland, North Carolina. In 2016, Luke established Luke Shalan Techné, a design consulting and fabrication studio based in California. Luke's work can be seen at Lawson-Fenning showroom in Hollywood, California, and has been included in exhibitions such as Cube Tool at Bradley Duncan Studio, Sunset Magazine's Idea House in Santa Monica, and Stienbesser Experimental Gastronomy Retrospective at the CODA Museum in the Netherlands. His work has been featured in publications including Sunset Magazine, Architectural Digest, POPEYE Magazine, C-File, and The Method Case. Alongside his own practice, Luke has designed, consulted, and produced ceramic work for many artists and designers. Luke currently resides in Sugarloaf, California, where he continues to operate Luke Shalan Techné. Shalan is resident at AMOCA from March of 2024 to middle of September. Before Luke starts his presentation, I just want to remind everybody that this talk is being recorded and there will be an opportunity at the end for Q&A. So I will now turn the presentation over to Luke.
Perfect. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. And thanks, Nathan, for that introduction, Beth Ann, and the entire staff at AMOCA for having me here. Also, thanks, Julianne and David Armstrong, Laguna Clay, and the Wingate Foundation for their support. So let's get right into it. From very early on, I was inspired to be physical in the world and make things with my hands. Here you can see me decorating Christmas cookies as a little guy. And then on the right, there's me in my studio. I've always been interested in working with my hands and continue to do that through clay. I grew up in a house with lots of crafting, creativity, and appreciation for art. My mother is a ceramic artist and an art educator. These are some of her earthenware smoke-fired pieces. I was raised around clay and spent many days in the studio where my mom taught. I believe I was greatly influenced by my exposure to clay at an early age and have a lot of gratitude for her support as I pursue a life in clay. So in this talk, I'm going to share my journey with clay as an artist, a fabricator, and enthusiast for being present in the physical world. In high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I loved making things and spent a lot of time in the art department. So I decided architecture seemed like a good marriage of my technical mind and my desire to be creative with what I did with my life. Early into a 5-year Bachelor's of Architecture degree at California College of the Arts, I could tell it wasn't going to be the right fit for me. I found myself in the ceramic studio and sculpture department throughout my first year a lot more often than the computer labs or design shop. it seemed like architecture was going to be more hands-off than I was interested in. I wanted to be working with physical materials, so I decided to change course and focus on a BFA in ceramics. What you see here is a piece relatively early on, that I made relatively early on. It's a man and an ape. They're both made out of stoneware, and then the boat is made out of found wood. The man is bound by rope, implying the ape has taken him captive. This piece was a commentary on the sometimes abrasive and parasitic relationship we have with the natural world, which is a theme I've continued to explore through my work. Also, while attending CCA, I explored some of my questions about capitalism and trade. This piece is called the Craft Exchange. I developed wheel throwing skills while I was at CCA and created these 40 unique mugs that were displayed, as you can see here. It was set up in a community space on campus, and the idea was small handmade goods in exchange for other small handmade goods, but all done on an honor system. It was accessible to anybody who wanted to make an exchange. Once others realized it was interactive, the exchanges began to pour in until there were basically no mugs left. And many of the cubbies have been exchanged multiple times. So really cool to see people trading different things and seeing the different value systems that people held. I was really happy with the engagement. And I included this piece because it was one of the first pieces I made that kind of tied a conceptual idea I had with functional pottery. And I was really interested in continuing to work in that space. So during the summer of 2012, I attended an atmospheric firing workshop at Penland School of Craft that was held by Catherine White. I was totally captivated by the raw process and the incredibly unique results of wood firing and soda firing. The act of firing this type of kiln is physical. It's kind of like a dance you do with the kiln, working together in a dynamic way. And the experience of being at Penland helped me envision ways of making a living with clay. I was surrounded by many individuals who had found a craft and were in pursuit of it. Penland provided the perfect opportunity to continue honing in my skills with clay, and I highly recommend attending a workshop or any offerings that Penland has to anyone who's interested in craft. There was more of a heavy focus on conceptual art at CCA than at Penland, and I appreciated that contrast of sort of focusing more on the material, the craft, and the process. So after a couple weeks at Penland, I returned to Oakland and dove back into exploring clay on a more fundamental level through some conceptual work. I wanted to look closer at the material that physically called to me. This piece was an ephemeral work where I built up clay in this void between these two tree limbs, letting the elements kind of control the fate of where this object was going. And then I documented it through photography throughout this process. So here's some photos of it being built up, and then photos of it decaying and crumbling. So I was thinking about ideas of growth, transformation, taking up space, and decay. I continued to find interest in making work about what it means to be human in the physical world, alongside my exploration of clay and my relationship to it as a material. I had the opportunity to produce some site-specific work on a piece of land in La Honda, California. This work explored the origins of clay and how we can affect cyclical systems in nature and disrupt those cycles. We have a permanent effect on clay when we fire it. It's really amazing to me how many different applications we've been able to find for clay and ceramics. But here I wanted to bring attention to our impact on resources and the earth in general. So I hiked the property, finding small clay deposits in a handful of locations, and brought the clay back to a studio and processed it. There I formed it into these dome shapes, fired and glazed them with a commercial white glaze, and then returned them to that same collection site that I had dug the clay from. This project felt like a really great opportunity to understand and try my hand at natural clay processing and thinking more deeply about our impact on the world's resources and our effect on space, both intentional and unintentional. This is another one of the pieces that I made while at La Honda. As I explored the property, I noticed all of these old fences designating containment and old property lines. This was a piece I was thinking about kind of the ideas of like privatization and control of space, claim, and our desire to be protected from the outside. These are images of pointless, kind of hypocritical fences made of fragile, ready to shatter or crumble clay and limbs from already downed trees that I found on the property. I wanted them to have a presence, but also be fragile and degrade as the piece weathered over time, fading back into its natural environment. This fence obviously wouldn't really keep anything in or out, but was more a representation of a designation of cutting through space and claiming an area of the earth. In 2013, I was fortunate enough to spend a semester at Australian National University. It's in Canberra, a couple hours south of Sydney in Australia. I studied with Greg Daly. He's a master of glaze chemistry, and Janet DeBooz and Joanne Surley, who exposed me to some really interesting firing methods using saggers, doing pit firing, and some other atmospheric techniques. I was really excited to be learning more about the chemistry and the background of this material I was working with. This was one of the pieces I made when I was in Australia. It was pit fired and is composed of slabs that were cut by a rough wire tool. The tool in my hand interacted with the clay tile, giving each one a unique undulating surface or landscape. And the carbon trapping from the pit firing process was achieved by masking some sections of each tile. So at this point, I was pretty aware that spending time in natural spaces was super important to me. And I began to see how it was influencing more and more of the art I was making. When I'm spending time in nature, it provides me with a sort of recharge that I feel like I need to keep navigating life. I'm generally happy with most activities out in nature, but ones that require like a level of skill and risk assessment are particularly appealing, such as rock climbing and skiing. There's a beautiful combination of problem solving with the brain and acting on that with the body. I get a guttural feeling that I'm supposed to be in these places doing these kinds of things. I think my love of mind and body activities in nature crosses over into my love of craft and making. I continue to spend as much time as possible outdoors, learning from my experience with nature and trying to reflect on that throughout my work. As I continued to explore ways of making with clay, I discovered a somewhat unconventional technique. Rather than using my hands to manipulate and form the clay, I decided to use the form of an object and the weight of the clay to conduct a process that gravity took most of the control over. I called it slab dropping, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. I was really excited by the way clay reacted to this process, stretching and taking on some resemblance of the form below, but also having a distinctly unique presence. Working with this new technique made me feel a bit like an explorer sailing into uncharted territory. There wasn't really an expert in slab dropping I could consult or apprentice with. I was kind of just making it up as I went, using the knowledge I had about clay and trying to keep an open mind. Much of what I had learned about ceramics and clay up to this point made it feel like what I was doing went against much of my teaching. But I liked the idea of rebellion and rethinking possibilities. This process was about movement, loss of control, and finding beautiful moments that reflect clay's unique ability to capture the tension and motion of each drop. I needed to learn how to behave around the process, allowing myself to fail and learn so I could understand what the clay wanted to do and what could be achieved through this fascinating discovery. I created many different versions of devices to achieve this exploration. These were designed with different reasoning in mind. Some of the devices I made were about scaling the process up. Others were about making it a mobile process. I did some performance pieces in school showcasing the process with the intention of taking a closer look at the ridiculousness of some of the things we do as humans, but also appreciate the ingenuity and out-of-the-box thinking that has brought us so many amazing innovations. I was thinking about labor, the interaction between humans, and the tools that we use. The bricolage or DIY aesthetic of my devices was inspired by a desire to create within my own means. We are always limited by some source. So the build of these devices was my expression of the access I had and influences that were around me at the time. I was inspired by sculptor and designer Anton Alvarez and his thread wrapping machine when I was developing these devices. Anton created his machine to streamline the process of thread wrapping lamps and other sculptural furniture he was making. It was a tool to increase productivity of his technique while providing creative freedom and adjustability. The tool is simple, but does what it's intended to do. It's not fully industrial in my mind, but it also asks questions about the boundaries of handmade for me. As I developed this slab dropped work, I was thinking about ideas of industrialization, consumption, creation, and my place in all of this. I noticed my great appreciation for my connection to simple hand tools. I decided to use this slab dropping technique to create archival pieces that showcased these tools, their ghosted forms embedded in clay's permanence. Here are some stills from a short documentational video of my largest slab dropping device in action. I was interested in seeing what came from scaling this process up. If anyone is interested in seeing any of the videos that I created, they're all available on my website, and I believe there's a link in the chat for that. And this is one of the finished archival slab pieces from that large device. The finished work is about 4.5 feet by 1.5 feet, and it's probably one of the larger pieces I've created. It's been challenging to find ways to create work at that scale, but I've been interested in how this process could be applied to larger ideas. I often think about our perception of innovation. When does development, growth, and innovation backfire? Who benefits from those innovations? These are a lot of the questions that I was asking myself when I was making this work and continue to ask myself today. Throughout this archival work, I was drawn back to the clay in the way it reacts and transforms. These moments are some of what captured my attention and led to pursuing more ideas around form, the interaction with light, rather than archival record keeping that had fueled the previous slab drop work. The previous images also kind of remind me of these snow bluffs that I photographed years ago. And I just wanted to include this because I love when nature influences the work that I'm making. So when I finished my degree at CCA, I wanted to continue my pursuit of ceramics outside of an institutional setting. I moved from the Bay Area to Southern California, where I was able to get a job working for Ben Medansky, who was getting his small batch pottery business off the ground. I also set up a small studio space with my good friend Brandon to continue pursuing my own ceramic work. Ben hired me as a fabricator. I was able to hone in on my throwing skills and learn a lot about managing a small ceramic business, as well as get a paycheck for making things out of clay, which is an important piece to life. I was given the freedom to help with design and utilize my problem-solving skills. It was a fun year, or a little over a year, working for Ben in downtown LA, getting to use my creative ceramic knowledge to help him grow his practice and feel out what I truly wanted to do with clay. Unfortunately, after a little over a year working with Ben, and this horrible fire destroyed his studio. It was extremely devastating for all of us who worked with him, and obviously for him. Luckily, Ben was able to rebuild his studio, but I ended up pursuing other freelance ceramic work at that point, building on my own ceramic practice. This experience was a wake-up call to the inconsistencies and unreliable nature of life. Unpredictability and chance play such a huge role. As much as we try to control the process, often life is completely out of our control. In 2016, I began working with Bradley Duncan, a designer and artist based in LA, to help sustain my ceramic practice. We have a similar way of working, and through his design aesthetic and my skills as a ceramic fabricator, we create collaborative work aligned with other collections of work he creates. Here you can see a piece in progress that is slab built and part of the Waveform collection, a series inspired by forms found in nature. On the left is an image of one of our finished sawtooth sculptures. The base is wood and the form on top is stoneware with a custom lichen-like glaze. And on the right is another work in progress from this series. Bradley Duncan and I continue to develop new work inspired by the nature around us. We are working on these modular block forms you can see here, and a new round of vessels at the moment, inspired by the nature around us. I think this collaborative work is very important to my personal creative growth and a way to keep my hands in clay as much as possible. So as I piece together freelance work through my small ceramic studio, I also continue to experiment with slab dropping and thinking about how I wanted to expand my artistic practice. In 2016, I was invited to participate in the first US-based Stienbesser experimental gastronomy event. Martin Kulik and Joan Winsema launched this project in 2012 in the Netherlands. These events brought chefs and artists together to create a truly unique culinary experience. This was the perfect opportunity to apply my slab dropping technique to some dishware. I was particularly excited by the way the event encouraged people to think about dining and eating. It challenged the assumptions of what a meal might look like and what functional pottery could be. It felt very aligned with my desire to question social normalities and reimagine perspectives. I created 60 unique dishes for this, and I was thinking about how undulating surfaces of my dishes might create a dialogue between the dish and the food. This experience helped me see that beyond archival record keeping, slab dropping had an application as dishware in an unconventional setting. This realm of designed object that pushed the limit of conceptual perception felt like a direction I could lean into. Alongside the experimental work I do with clay, I continue to produce small batch production pottery, often in collaboration with others. I love the process of working with someone who has an idea and wants to use my skill set to develop a uniquely designed object. Jobs like these help sustain my small home studio. Balancing this work with my art practice is often more challenging than I ever imagined it would be. It may not provide the space and time to make conceptual art like I thought it might, but it keeps my hands in clay and provides for collaborative making, and in many ways satisfies my desires as a creative individual wanting to spend time doing things with my hands. When time allowed, I was still thinking about applications for the slab dropping technique. These are some installations of Nepalese or prickly pear cactus paddles I created using this technique. I've always been a big fan of plants occupying our spaces. I want to try to evoke the feeling of warmth and life that plants can bring to a colder space. Here are some photos of the process of making these. They are formed by dropping slabs of clay over real Nepalese paddles, giving each one a unique individual kind of presence. I've created many different installations of these in various arrangements. Here you can see an installation at a private residence. So having collaborated with many in the design world, I was contacted by Kallmyer about working on a project together. He was a musician and conceptual artist influenced by the Fluxus movement. This project was a fantastic chance to work with someone from a different background than I was typically used to, but who had some overlapping ideas about art and life. The project we worked on was titled Ensemble and involved an instrument Chris designed and made that required 8 individuals to play. We worked together designing, making, and testing potential bell forms for the instrument. Many of the ceramic bells we created were installed in an entry installation as conceptual possibilities for what a belt could be. It was inspiring to see some of my work in this museum setting, and working with Chris revitalized my interest in connecting with those working in more conceptual art spaces. So I was still exploring slab dropping and wanted to keep expanding this technique. So with an interest in geometry, I decided to make 6 square slabs and assemble them into a cube, creating a more complex object out of this technique. Here's an image you can see of me working on a cube in my studio. I adapted the process a little bit from what I was doing earlier to accommodate this new direction. I was interested in how it held on to the beautiful way clay can capture motion and tension and express weight and physical change. I really love the way light responded to these forms, and I was instantly attracted to them as objects. I'm always curious about where attraction comes from and what drives us to follow any given path. I've made many different versions of these, altering their forms and size, and here's an image of a couple of examples of those. So the slab dropping technique often has unexpected outcomes, and these images show the point where there was enough force applied that the clay actually ruptured. I'm fascinated when the clay does something unexpected like this. I think it harks back on my desire to find a moment of discovery in the work that I'm creating. So after spending about 5 years in Los Angeles, I was feeling kind of uninspired or maybe just overwhelmed by much of the urban environment and wanted to be surrounded by more nature and have more space. So my partner and I decided to move to Joshua Tree. I was instantly inspired by this landscape. This new setting felt like an opportunity to dive into some work I'd been thinking about, but hadn't approached in a physical form yet. One of the ideas I was thinking about is perceptions of waste and how we should question our assumptions about preconceived ideas. I began intentionally analyzing the waste or byproduct of my studio practice. I was attempting to perceive this waste that I was creating with a different perspective. These images you see here are bat trimming incense trays. I developed these using waste materials from production throwing, finding value in a part of the process that I was normally discarding in my reclaim bucket. These have changed my perspective on this scrap's usefulness and provided for a piece of art that I've created. So these are some inspirational samples gathered during the making of my work. I included this slide to share a snapshot of what the research I do in my studio looks a little like. These are kind of like scientific specimens that are byproduct of my practice, observed and preserved for future ideas. And these are some of the sculptures that I made while out in Joshua Tree alongside a batch of production bowls for a designer named Jenni Kayne. Again, I constantly try to balance my artistic work with other ceramic freelance jobs, always wanting to have my hands in the clay. Here are a few more of the sculptures I made, influenced by the waste or unintentional outcomes I was producing in my studio and inspired by some of the landscapes around me. Sorry for the poor quality on this photo, guys. And here's a better image of 2 of these pieces that were inspired by the processes I was uncovering. This piece felt like a good example of taking that idea of using scrap materials to make something more complex. I'm really interested in how you can take many little parts and combine them to create larger ideas or larger sculptures. So as I became more aware of little unnoticed moments in my studio practice, I began doing more material gathering and testing. My home spray booth will occasionally get large buildups of layered glaze material when spraying lots of production work. These interesting little glaze remnants, they kind of form from like the overspray when you're glazing pieces. Reminded me of geological artifacts and the close connection ceramic has to geology, the way layers can build up to create landscapes that will tell a story. I wanted to try to preserve these fragile specimens. So I got the chance to test fire a bunch of these while here at AMOCA, preserving their form by finding the correct temp to fuse but not melt completely. These will be material studies that will go into my library and will be used for reference on future projects that maybe reference landscape, layering, that kind of idea. So I really connected with Joshua Tree and the surrounding desert, but after spending a summer in the heat, my partner and I decided it wasn't going to be the right fit for us year round. I could see myself back there during part of the year due to how much inspiration I felt. But for now, we found a pretty great way of life just outside of Big Bear Lake in Sugarloaf, California. After moving to Sugarloaf in search of a life near more wild spaces, I found it challenging to connect with a community of locals that were making things with their hands. Nonetheless, I had a desire to serve and connect with those around me. My good friend Aaron, who I had met through skiing, introduced me to Gong Fu tea drinking, Gong meaning skilled endeavor, and Fu meaning time spent. This is a traditional way of drinking tea in China, focusing on time with the tea, appreciating its quality, and appreciating each other. The fast pace of modern Western worlds doesn't always give me the time to experience life like this. I'd love to try to bring more attention to time spent in this manner. So I began exploring making some of my own Gong Fu tea sets at this point. These are comprised of a gaiwan, which is a brewing vessel, fairness cup for distributing the tea, and small cups so every sip is enjoyed. Aaron and I decided to start a small business, Stone and Leaf Tea Co., providing this service at farmers markets and other local events. This project was about trying to connect with the community and share a way of being in the world. My tea journey has been a great way to connect with people and share my passion for being present, my passion for process and ceramics. But I was still seeking ways to give back and connect even more, so I decided to join Ski Patrol last year. Being part of the Ski Patrol team has given me a chance to be outside in the wilderness and spend more time away from my studio, which has provided a kind of revitalization of my creative energy. Back in the studio, I was continuing to think about creating from a position of an observer. I became familiar with the concept of scholar stones. I've always been inspired by the landscape around me as I explored the natural world while riding my mountain bike, skiing, or rock climbing. I noticed the diverse beauty and I feel a force pulling me to dive in deeper. Gomshi, Suseko, or Suiseki, also known as viewing stones or scholar's stones, represent the ancient tradition of observing nature's beauty and unique quality. They are an attempt to elevate the unseen and a way of giving natural discoveries a space to be showcased. The practice of collecting these attractively shaped stones dates back thousands of years. This idea of seeing a natural formation, appreciating what can be learned from it, and elevating it felt very aligned with some of the ideas I had been investigating in my studio practice. I went to Big Island of Hawaii in 2019 to explore its unique landscape. I was intrigued by the new formations of land from the lava flows that ruthlessly spread over the existing land. It was a fantastic example of cycles in nature, growth, transformation, and decay. I spent some time in Volcano National Park taking lots of photos of the colors and textures found in the calderas and lava flows. Hidden in the details of this seemingly careless lava flow are intricate landscapes, patterns, and potential for new growth. When I returned from my trip, I created a body of work inspired by the landscapes of both Hawaii and Joshua Tree. These sculptures were also inspired by the idea of perceiving value differently and attempting to showcase clay's natural tendencies. The intention was not so much in the craft of making these or the technical skills needed to form a preconceived idea into a pleasing or useful form, but rather in the idea of me as a unique being in this world, seeing clearly and showing an appreciation for what I see. I'm doing my best to not let my preconceived ideas about clay and making get in the way of seeing potential in a moment that ignites something for me. There are so many situations in life where I find moments being dismissed if they aren't understood or were not part of the quote unquote plan. There's so much value in being able to see beyond the parameters we set for ourselves and remain open to unforeseen outcomes. Taking a position of observer and making choices based on my observations rather than making choices first and then directing the material to do what I want is core to the work I'm interested in creating. I'm revisiting these works currently to try to push them a little bit further. They feel a little incomplete to me. I've decided to make pedestals for each one to elevate them and connect back to the original inspiration I got from Gong Fu or scholar stones. Here's an image of some of the pedestals I'm currently working on in an attempt to try to elevate the work. They are slightly ornate and clean, hopefully showcasing the work how I want them to. I'm excited to see what this edition does for these. I want to note how often the creations I'm most interested in form over a relatively long time period. Being able to give this kind of work the time and space to reveal itself is super important to me. So in preparation for this residency, I did some self-reflecting and writing about what I wanted to achieve while here. These are some of the ideas I had coming into my residency and a photo of my space on day one, and then a photo from much more recently where the work space is filled with work. You can also see Freya here. She's my doggo. And yeah, just want to thank her because she's an awesome creature. So when I first got to AMOCA, I started a series of slab drop cubes. It felt good to get something moving while I worked on the more experimental ideas I wanted to take on. I was very excited by access to a soda kiln again to be able to explore new surface design for this new body of cubes. Here are some images of some of the cubes I made during my residency. I love the way the form of these interact with the flashing slip and firing process of the soda kiln. I feel drawn into the little unique moments, but I also appreciate them as objects. I like to think about these pieces like they're a physical map, telling the story about the process that this object went through. I find myself focusing on the materials, the process, and the unforeseen outcomes that came to life in each of these pieces. Here's a cube in an alternative orientation. I also made this piece during my time here. I'm drawn to the balance, tension, and precarious nature of this orientation and hope to explore this idea more. Along with rethinking aspects of the cube's orientation and surface design, I had come into this residency wanting to create some larger work. This cube is about 3 feet by 3 feet. I used a combination of slab dropping and hand building to add some structural integrity, I hoped, to create this piece. Adaptations and adjustments definitely needed to be made when working at this larger scale. And it was definitely a learning process for me. Inspired by the ruptured nubs of past cubes, I was keen on sharing those moments of chance. I decided to use just one single nub on this cube in an effort to focus on the beauty that is found when control is given over to the process and the material. Here you can see it entering into the bisque. Hopefully it makes it through. Unfortunately, this piece had some issues through the glaze firing. It was probably due to errors with my building technique and probably the choice of clay body that I was using. I don't think these cracks are very successful, but I wanted to include this because I think it's important to note my intention of allowing the material and process to take over control and when that is okay versus not okay. So attempting to share unintended outcomes, it's kind of a delicate line to walk on. I sometimes see my approach to my current work as a bit abrasive to my appreciation for technical skill in any given craft. In my future work, I'd like to continue to ask what legitimizes good creation and when is it important to share skill and intention versus ask questions about the skills we develop and give credit to the material, process, or outcomes that were maybe beyond our control. I believe it's the artist's perception that determines the value of these moments of chance. In the process of creating the slab drop work, I began to accumulate scraps that I could start to create from. As the work started to show itself to me, the concepts behind the symbolic motifs I was using started to align with ideas I've been thinking about for many years. I decided to use these motifs like building blocks or units to create larger scale work. The spiral motif, which you see here, arose through my investigation and observation of scrap material in my studio process. I throw all my slabs of clay out when I'm doing the slab dropping. And so they all have this sort of organic, rough, natural edge to them that I typically will cut off and then discard into my reclaim bucket. I was attempting to find a purpose for this scrap material. The process of using the offcut scraps began with these flowers. I was making them with a similar intention and was stemming from the ideas I had been thinking about while living out in Joshua Tree about perceptions of waste. These flowers were born out of a desire to take a moment away from the current project I was working on to have a somewhat meditative moment with the clay. Ultimately, this is manifested as more of a conceptual shift about wastefulness than an actual reduction of my personal waste, but it touches on a shift in mindset or a change in practice to be able to imagine and implement an alternative to the reality I was facing. Using the spiral motif, I intended to create a larger installation with multiple pieces. I've always been interested in transforming spaces, and this residency felt like a great opportunity to try something bold with this new body of work. In thinking about self-reflecting, spiraling tendencies, and the need to look both inward and to the external world in front of us, I made these sketches of some directions that seemed potentially interesting to me. I wanted to include mirrors in this work to directly represent the idea of reflection and invite the viewer and their surroundings or the context they're in into the work itself. I was drawn to the spiraling nature of how I created the flowers and how it mirrored the spiraling nature of so much of life. I think I was making this work as a way of accepting the place I'm currently in and releasing some of the energy I've internalized over the years about myself, my work, and my view of the world. It was also an opportunity to follow my gut and not feel bound by restrictions I had previously applied to my making process. Here are some images showcasing the process of working at this scale and in this way. I had a blast figuring out how to build, glaze, and load this work in the kiln. AMOCA Studio provides equipment I didn't have access to previously. I don't think I would have been able to create much of this work without the help of the tools, kilns, and the expertise that Nathan and Tim offer here at AMOCA. Here are two possible variations of the spiral dome piece from the previous slide. And here are some wall-mounted works. All of this work represents self-reflection and looking inward for me. They act as a way to share observation of our surroundings, what context are we in, and what physical surroundings are we around at any given moment. Along with these ideas, I continue to think about functionality and how art can sometimes reach more individuals when it is accompanied by another function. Having the functionality of a mirror while simultaneously offering a conceptual take on form and material makes me feel like these are in a space between fine art and designed object, possibly. I continue to navigate this space that bridges art and design and ask myself where my work lies between these two worlds. I'm currently finishing a few larger wall works in this series that may accompany the other work you've seen in the larger installation. Here's some images of the work still in progress. I'm hoping to get some installation views possibly before my residency comes to an end to see this work in a gallery space, but I can also envision these as functional objects in someone's home. Another motif that I'm using is the torn nub. I love the tension and action that can be seen in the way the clay tears apart. I'm interested in the individual moment of separation that the clay shows, the unique experience each piece has when exposed to this tension, and how that is visible in the physical form of each nub. The idea of tearing something apart versus holding it together is really interesting and especially relevant to some of my current reflections. I began working on a few forms using this motif, finding a rhythm with the process and taking many, many hours attaching all these individual little pieces to the larger form. This work is a representation of the individual hiding amongst the many. It's also about labor and the intention I put towards showcasing clay's tendencies. I hope this work will draw the viewer into the unique details, seeing each nub has its own story and that only can be observed if noticed with care. I plan to finish this work with an oxide wash I've been developing and firing it in the soda kiln before my residency comes to a close at the end of September. Here's some sample glaze tests and a few smaller pieces from this series that I just pulled out of the kiln. Over the next month, I'll be working on finishing up much of what I've created here. I'm going to miss having access to the soda kiln and all the beautifully unpredictable results it produces, along with the incredible access to all of AMOCA Studio's wonderful equipment and space. I'm really happy with the discoveries that I made over the last 5 months and the work I've been able to create. I really enjoyed working in this method and hope to continue exploring ways of showcasing clay as a material, asking questions about myself and my intention and where that intention is coming from, along with continuing to hone in my skills as a ceramic artist. Spending this time devoted to investigating my more experimental artistic practice has helped me see how necessary it is to create space and time for this type of work. There's so much value in the process of discovery. The world is not linear, and the way our realities unfold is embedded with unpredictability and unforeseen moments. I think this residency broadened my understanding of this and provided a chance to really dig into some work around these ideas. After my residency comes up to a close, I'll be gearing up for another season of ski patrol, and I'll be continuing the collaborative ceramic work I do out of my home studio. I'll also devote time to these new bodies of work with the intention of further developing some of the ideas I covered in this talk today. And that's kind of it. So thank you all for attending. I hope this was enjoyable. I think we're going to have some time for questions.
Yeah.
Just to give a quick shout out to the entire community at AMOCA. It's an awesome place here. I feel really lucky to have been a part of it.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much, Luke. Great talk. So we have some time for questions now. So please feel free to either type out your question in the chat or use the little raised hand emoji, and then we can call on you to verbally ask your question. I have a question. Have you worked more with that Stienbesser group?
Yeah, so I haven't attended any of the other events that they've put on, but they have requested some work from me. They've done a couple of retrospectives. So it's been a few years since I've worked with them, but yes, I've done a couple of projects with them.
Cool. Yeah, it seemed like a really interesting
It was a really
placement
awesome
of your work. Yeah.
And yeah, the way it sort of aligned with what I was doing at the time
Mm-hmm.
was very cool.
All right, got anything?
I think I see a question in the chat.
Um,
Different sorts of objects you drop onto for the cubes. Yeah, so the question was, what objects do I drop my slabs of clay onto for the cubes? And I actually, so for the cubes, I create these grids of either nails or I've used wire ties. Like I'm kind of just finding objects that are around my studio and creating landscapes, you could say, for the clay to drop over. So for the cubes that I showed you in this talk, most of them are grids of either screws or nails put into a board.
nice. Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
I guess I covered it all. No one has
All
questions.
right. Very detailed talk. Perfect. Okay, cool. So unless I see one come in while I'm reading this outro. So thank you all for joining us and for for the questions that came through. Our excellent questions. Thank you, Genevieve. For more of Luke's work, you can visit his website, lukeshalantechne.com, which we are dropping in the chat right now. If you're in the neighborhood too, come visit the Museum and Ceramic Studio in Pomona, and you can learn more about AMOCA, our ceramic studio, our residency program, our programming exhibitions by going to our website, amoca.org. Yeah, and just a reminder, this has been recorded, so it'll pop into your email in the next few weeks. So yeah, thank you all for joining us today. See you later.